we all strive to sort of pull in discussions around big data when we're making our decisions, and even to the point where we've had some discussions about zero-party data today. At the end of the day, when rubber hits the road, we're kind of all beholden to the dollar, right, and what that's going to perform for us. And so when you bring it down to it, best in market media pricing is still obviously very, very key in our minds, where there's a room full of individuals who manage, multi-million-dollar budgets on behalf of their companies, and how we deploy those and how effectively we deploy them into the market is critical and important. So yes, we've seen audio experience a boom. A flurry of activity in the space in the past few years. We've talked about it at length today. And, even with the points that we're seeing green shoots in the economy, things are looking up. But despite this, there's still many marketeers who remain cautious about dealing with the channel. The product needs to be seen. Digital channels require less risk, wary of controversy that some hosts can elicit. So for the last panel of the day, we want to dive into the area more deeply, and I'm delighted to introduce four very powerful business leaders. I'm intimidated by this panel, I have to say. Four great colleagues who I work with regularly. And, we want to talk to them a little bit about their thoughts on how they manage and sort of deploy and control the dollars for their individual companies. So I'm delighted to present all four of you. If you could maybe spend a few words. Mei, Kezia, Eliza, and obviously Miranda from Oxford Road. So if you want to say a couple of words about yourselves.
Sure. My name is Mei He, and I run global paid media at Oracle. And excited to be here. It's definitely a space that I feel like a blink of an eye, we've been in this for a while. It felt like just yesterday we were tipping our toes into it.
Hi, my name is Kezia Koo, and I'm from Indeed. And so I'm the Senior Director of Global Employer Marketing. And so in short, I help employers use us as their hiring partners. I've been in audio for at least 10 years at 4 different companies. And so it's a great space. And so you're going to hear a lot of great things from me.
Hi, I'm Miranda. I've been at Oxford Road for 10 years. I oversee the media department. I've been buying audio podcasts since before then, and it's just amazing to see everything evolve and be here with all of you discussing.
Hi, I'm Eliza Davis, and I lead the offline team at Babbel on the performance marketing team. At pretty much every brand that I've worked at, audio has always played a huge impact on the success and just overall brand awareness. And we see the exact same thing at Babbel. So definitely excited to dive into some of what we do.
I think you might have answered my first question, but anyway, no, it was well, thank you for the introduction. So as a macro question, as a starter really, and I want to kind of pose this to, because we've got different brands, different verticals in the room, business to business, business to consumer. I want to pose this question to Mei and Eliza, with two very different kinds of sort of verticals that you work in. What is it you believe that makes audio different from other channels for your business specifically? And perhaps, Mei, you can talk to that for B2B first.
When I was thinking through this, as she was asking, the first thing that comes up to my mind is visibility. I think my background is in paid digital marketing, and in digital marketing, a lot of people in here probably know you can filter, you can target. Audio is very different. And so when we first ran audio ads, it was extremely exciting and refreshing that I had different people from the company, from our customers saying, hey, I heard your ad. And in the world of digital, it never really was like that, because you're targeting a very specific audience versus audio is completely different. And I still have salespeople coming to me and saying, it's so great to hear us being on a pod that I listen to, that I know my customers listen to.
Great. How about you, Eliza, from this perspective?
Honestly, pretty much the same thing. I would say everything that everyone has touched on today in terms of the trust and loyalty between hosts, endorsers, and their audiences, the intimacy that exists between those two. Paul touched on it this morning, but just the fact that especially if you're listening with your headphones in, if you're listening at home, one, like you can consume this media literally anywhere you are. It can be with you at all times. And in addition to that, it's basically just, it feels like it's a friend. And it's essentially word of mouth advertising. And so I think it's super impactful when it is genuine. And it's the same thing. We have people coming up to us all the time. We heard this on the radio. We heard about you on our favorite podcast. And what's really cool is when you have people who listen to totally different genres tell you, oh, I heard about my favorite host from this podcast was telling me about how Babbel helped them before they went to Italy to visit their future in-laws. And then you hear someone else, oh, I needed to learn Spanish for a new job that I want, and I heard about that from something totally different. And I think that's one of the great things, is because we don't necessarily use that degree of targeting, you have like this huge breadth of opportunity.
Cool. I want to pick up on something that Mei, you said at the beginning, where you said you came through digital channels, right? And I'd like to actually pose to the audience, how many of you have started, obviously you're now dealing with audio, but how many of you actually started your media careers or marketing careers coming primarily through digital? As a show of hands. It's quite a fair few number of you. And the reason I asked that question, and I want to pose this to the entire panel, is as we've seen over the past few years, and again, we've talked about it a lot today, almost the resurgence, the revolution in audio the last few years. Based on this, and we see it in many other platforms, obviously specifically in TV, there's lots of expertise on a client side, but how important do the four of you feel on this panel that it is for a brand to perhaps consider a dedicated degree for a person in just being responsible for audio, the fabled chief audio officer moniker that we've come up with? And is this something you would consider, or do you think there'd be serious pushback internally? I'm going to pose it to Kezia first. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine pushback. I think it all depends on how audio fits into your portfolio. So I can assume that if you've never had audio before, you probably have somebody maybe spread broadly testing channels. Sometimes we have sort of little incubator teams and companies. And so I think when you're at a place where audio is definitely working, you're going to want to diversify and further invest. And the reality is that if somebody spreads super thin, then they can't really be an expert. And so I think there's just so much going on in audio. I'd question if one person can really do it. I mean, we're talking about terrestrial, we're talking about satellite, podcast, streaming audio. And so I think if it's working for you, unlikely that one person can do it. And so I would say that you always want to lean into anything that's working. And if it's not working, figure out how to make it work. I'm a firm believer that if your audience is there, you should be there. If they are engaged in a platform, if they're open to marketing, if they're open to being responsive, you should be there. And so I think sometimes when I hear people say, I do these 8 different things, well, let's be honest, you're probably not doing them all well, right? And so I think, then I ask again, well, how are your audio campaigns going? Oh, it's okay, we're struggling. You need to really have somebody who's going to lean in, really learn, immerse themselves in the space, figure out what works. And so I would be a fan of this if there is enough scale, enough going on.
It's interesting you talk about scale. I mean, there's some recent reports that show that audio represents approximately, depending on the channel, but total audio 8 to 9% of all spending. And yet there's also been independent studies say that audio consumes almost 25 to 30% of a person's individual media consumption. Does that pay weight internally to have that as an argument? And should you just be in point an agency?
I mean, I use agencies. Because I think it's really hard to find people who are really great in this space. And so even if you've got a really great marketer who can test their way into any channel, I think the reality is at some point is you want to do more than the human bodies you have. And I think we all want people to grow in their careers. You want to feel like you've got enough time to do what you need to do. And so I think at every company I've been at, when you prove the concept, I think it's always a great opportunity to hand it off to trusted hands. And so I have been a fan of using agencies, but that's because they're bringing expertise as well as a lot of extra hands and bandwidth. And so I think you can try to do this in-house, but I have just found that at certain scales, it's really difficult to make the numbers work internally. And I think also sometimes, younger people, they want to diversify, right? And so sometimes like they want, after a few years, go to a different channel. And so I think if you got an agency who can help help you, then I think it's a little bit better for the long run. And so that's just my thoughts.
I'm going to pass that to anyone else on the panel. Mei or Eliza, do you have a perspective at all?
I would agree. I would approach it as a hybrid approach. You start off. I mean, we started off like I think it was like 35% of my time and 50% of Eric's time. We hired an agency, we hired some contractors, and it was a hodgepodge. And then we proved that it worked through data. And then you know, I wouldn't say that we've grown the team because we've more like pushed our agency to grow their team to help support us. So I think every company has to kind of think about it from a standpoint of what works for them, and that's how we made it work for us.
Cool. Eliza, did you want to add anything? I know you're a recent part of the Oxford family and working with you. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's important to definitely look at, I would say, all of audio, but especially the piece that is similar to, influencer. So working with endorsers and all of that, it's important to have that expertise. And that can, in certain cases, mean that is your sole, responsibility. But I think a lot of it depends on the resources of the company. If you're working at a smaller, early stage startup where you're wearing a lot of hats, I think it just depends on the circumstance. I think in an ideal world, that role would exist, and there would be a lot of growth opportunities for that person to work their way up and have, audio as this like career path fully on the brand side. But I do think that just the way I'm thinking about it, based off my experience, is that typically you're doing a lot of jobs. So
across different channels.
Yeah. So that's my take on it. I think in an ideal world, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I do. Okay. Well, segueing into the next question then, and obviously we know, depending on how you're using and the task is always task driven, it can be a combination of both these things. But for each of you on the panel, or I'm going to pose this question out to both, to Mei and Kezia actually, when considering audio as a potential channel, and you don't consider it, I know you both use it, but do you see it viewed within your own sort of marketing mix as a performance driving channel, a brand building channel, or is it a combination of both contingent on the kind of messaging or the task that you want to achieve? Can you talk to that, both of you?
I can start. I think for us, it's definitely both. We have a pretty large marketing organization, and so the brand team as well as the performance team both use audio. But just like any company, the goals are very different. So if you're in a brand team, you probably value awareness, consideration, reach, maybe even driving people to the site. I think if you're part of a performance team, there's a clear growth or some sort of clear conversion metric. And so even though we both operate in this space, our media plans are very different. So the shows we pick, the frequency, and so what we're looking to get out of it, the creative is very different. And so I would say if anybody's saying, oh, this type of channel is only XYZ, I don't think it's true. And I don't think it's unique just where I'm at right now. I think many companies have been at, we've seen either if I'm responsible for brand, we do brand. If it's performance, or we call this kind of brand formance, it's kind of hybrid, where maybe you're launching a product, launching a new service, and you need to just talk to people a little bit to let them know, hey, there's what you need this service. And so I've found that audio gives you that opportunity to really talk about why what you do really matters. And so I would say for us, it is definitely both. And not every channel works that way. And so I think, yeah, audio, and when I say audio, I mean like all formats of audio. And so sometimes folks think like, oh, this format of audio works and it doesn't work. My customers are consuming all types of audio. There just isn't a type of audio that doesn't work for us. Like it all works for us. Fair enough, some types of audio took us longer to figure out, to unlock. But in order for us to be at the scale we're at, we had to get that to work because the reality is our customers were there. They were responsive. And so we needed to be there. And so that's what I would say.
Just before I pass it to Mei, that's an interesting point because when we relay back to the creative panel before, or one of the earlier panels today, I think it could have been a client from Hello Bello who was talking about the fact that when you go in and test, if you don't see your results immediately, you need to sort of persist through and see how you can work. Is that something that you would say is fair in this perspective as well?
Yeah, I think my perspective is not that something doesn't work, but rather how can I get it to work? And so because my mindset is always, if my customers are there, if they're responsive to advertising, if I can target them and it's efficient to reach them, I should be successful. And so it's just a question of time. And so I've seen people give up too quickly, and I've always been fairly patient. I'm always clear on what we're testing and the levers, but I think it's important to not give up. There have been some things, just look back at my career where I was targeting college students. They were clearly on Meta. We could not get that campaign to work. We still spent, we still tested because they were there. And so when I hear folks say, oh, I tried it once and it didn't work, well, you gave up too quickly, you know? And so I think every time you have a failed test, you should have clear learnings. So from my perspective, it's never really a failed test. So fair enough, it didn't hit your conversion metric or whatever you were looking to accomplish. But if you learned something about your audience, if you learned what didn't work, that to me is a win. And so I would just say keep that mindset, just be persistent in your testing and try different things, but don't give up.
100%.
If you know your customer is there and if they're responsive.
100%. May, if I can pose the question to you, obviously a very, very different vertical, different point of entry in terms of price, but what would you say about that question?
We're definitely very different. I would say that the short answer is both, but we force rank it. So performance by far is always going to be first, and then it's a brand play. We look at the data and say, okay, is the performance there? And if it's not there, we look at it from a different perspective and say, okay, did we see a brand lift? Did we see any other data points that could point to us telling us that it was working or not? But we do force rank performance first. Cool. That's how we get the dollars to spend more money.
Cool. I want to shift gears slightly. We've talked a little bit strategically about the channel, performance, brand, etc. I'm going to take it in a little bit more of a tactical direction. Obviously, we're now in the second half of the year, sort of rolling towards the challenging times in Q3 and Q4. So I'd like to ask this question. I'm going to pose this to Kezia and Miranda, actually. So obviously we know the value of laying in early dollars, right? Obviously you get what you want early on. In this marketplace at the moment that's challenged, I mean, Dan alluded to it earlier, we're really moving into a buyer's marketplace. How do you see, and even if you want to quote some percentages, holding back dollars for last minute opportunities as a tactic, especially as we go into the competitive second half of the year?
I think it really depends. I mean, if what you're spending in audio is a material portion of what the business needs, and you're on the hook for driving some kind of revenue, some kind of value, I would caution on holding dollars back. If you believe that if you're successful, you can ask for more. And so I think I don't try to hold back a ton of money. Now, if you're in a place where you're part of the mix, it's not a material portion, and you've got a lot of space to test, podcasts are always opening up. And so I think it's always a good idea to have some money in case something new comes up, you can move quickly. Speaking as someone who's missed opportunities countless times, and mainly because our internal process to get money is so slow. And so early on, Oxford said, please put aside money, please put aside money. And so I would encourage you, if you know exactly what you want to buy, go ahead and just buy it. But if you're not entirely sure what you want, just like when you go to the mall, just have some money available that you can really take advantage and take action really, really quickly. And so I would say I'm a planner at heart, and so I'm not going to tell you hold money aside and just wait. Please, if you know what you want, go buy it, go reserve it. If you don't know what you want, hold some money back. But it's a tight marketplace. And so I think you also have to think about what you're buying. If your audience is in high demand, you got to move quickly. If you know the kind of content you want to buy has low supply, move quickly. If you're operating at a scale which is quite large and you need to get enough inventory, go ahead and buy it now. But I think if you're operating at a smaller scale, less money, you're going after an audience where you know there's supply, you're very broad about your shows, then you can afford to wait. But I think only you know how that works for you and your company.
I would also say it's not a one-size-fits-all. If you are in a competitive category or you know that your core shows sell out far in advance, Obviously, you need to lock those in as soon as possible. But we do recommend reserving anywhere from 10 to 20% of budget for dynamic planning, regardless of the marketplace. Throughout the years, we've always have seen opportunities, new shows, deals become available throughout the course of the year. This year has been so overwhelming that we created a new process just to manage everything that's coming in on a daily basis. And one thing that we do for our advertisers is we essentially have a rolling list of opportunities. So we know what we want, and if it becomes available at a reduced rate, we can quickly pull the trigger.
Cool. I'm gonna further probe you on that a little bit, Miranda. So there's been a lot of change in the last 3 years, obviously through COVID. Have you seen any of these buying practices evolve in a post-COVID economy? And what do you think are the key trends that we're seeing in this direction?
Last year was very different from what we're experiencing this year. As we've been discussing throughout the pandemic, podcasting became more mainstream. There were a lot of acquisitions and investments. And while those investments made the space more digitally enabled, publishers really set themselves up to take on more opportunities at the expense of existing advertisers. There was this hyper focus on monetization, squeezing out costs. So advertisers were paying more and we were getting less value. Even with contracts in place, we saw publishers trying to change terms, insertion types. They were cramming in a bunch of ad units to make room for programmatic, all with limited communication in pursuit of increased revenue. That lack of transparency and accountability exacerbated an already, I don't want to say immature, a growing market where to this day we still see limited automation and standardization, even in the most basic things like terminology. This year, things have come down to earth. We've reset, we're recalibrating. It's a buyer's market. With advertiser budgets scaling back or even staying flat, but new opportunities continuing to launch and existing opportunities fighting to fill inventory, publishers are working harder than ever for our dollars. And that competition, it gives us leverage with rates and terms, but it also gives us leverage in forcing accountability, particularly when it comes to things like reporting, delivery, separation, and exclusivity, which this year we have to be extra vigilant on because of the groundwork that has been laid over the last 2 years. But the good news is there's just a lot more flexibility and collaboration.
Cool. I know. We're running out a little bit of time, so I'm going to actually go to the last question. And what I'm going to say is, from the four of you, what advice would you give for new brands who are entering into the space, who are looking to go beyond just a testing scale perspective within the channel? Is there anything you can impart to our colleagues here in the room, some of which are just beginning to test and learn within the space? Eliza?
I can start. So the most common mistake that I see, particularly for advertisers managing things in-house, is that 50% or more of their media will just be with one or a few publishers, which I get, it's easy, the space is still very fragmented, but don't over-rely on one or just a few publishers. I also see lack of diversification when it comes to genres or subgenres. Even for advertisers spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a month in media, 50 to 75% of their budget will just be on 2 genres. So diversify, test wide, make sure that you're creating a balanced campaign. I would also say when something isn't a hit out of the gate, and Kezia, this goes back to your point, don't use, cancellation is not an optimization. There are so many levers that you can pull, starting with allowable rate, spot lengths, placement in pods, and testing out those different buying tactics will give you the advantage of learning and building out best practices as you scale. And as I said before, now more than ever, publishers are willing to work with us. We just had a campaign, an underperforming campaign on a big show. We were running an announcer-read spot. Wasn't working, and for no increase in CPM, they kept it flat. They converted it to a host-read. I would also say, just because a podcast is cool, hosted by a celebrity or at the top of the charts does not mean that you should buy it. In fact, for those reasons, the host sometimes doesn't really care as much, and that shows up in performance. And then I think it's a lot more complex and nuanced. There are a lot of layers to it than I think most people think. So I would just encourage, like, have patience. Don't take shortcuts, and don't let publishers cut your value short. Push them to problem solve on issues, especially the many issues that are coming to light, until the ad tech is sophisticated enough to manage things like even rotation in pod. There are a lot of places to buy. There are a lot of ways to buy. This year alone, we've worked with over 200 different partners, many of them operating on their own terms. And it's always changing, which makes it really hard to standardize best practice. I'll give an example. There's a medium-sized publisher. A year and a half ago, they're trying to sell me on, we call our dynamically inserted spots baked in because they live forever. A couple months ago, having a casual conversation, I'm asking about programmatic, and they're bragging that they have all of this inventory because they're starting to strip out those baked-in reads that you guys bought as baked in that lives there forever. So that's just one example of the many hidden subtleties that you need to be aware of. And the Pixel, it's not a magic bullet. It's not going to solve all of your problems, but it will help you get clarity and visibility into those types of things, which are crucial if you want to scale in this space.
Wow, pearls. Anything else from the model?
I don't have more. I'm sorry. I mean, I could go on, but you said we were short on time, and you already cut a question out.
No, that's good. It's good. It's golden. Kezia or Mei or Eliza, is there anything else you feel you can add to that?
I would just add a few things. I know this is something that Dan and Miranda are both really passionate about, probably everyone in this room, but something that has come to light as the industry is changing, and something that we definitely pay a lot more attention to now, is our share of voice. With all of these changes, with DAI, with faked in spots, what's happening is that it's sounding a little bit more like radio. And you have these commercial breaks. That's genuinely what they feel like now, and they're disruptive. Mm-hmm. And you could be one of three. And that's something that it used to just be, pre-roll or mid-roll. Now it's where you fall within all of the advertisers that are going to be in that episode. And so that is something that I think is really important to pay attention to. And then in addition to that, something that I've learned, especially with podcasts, is we all talk about the marketing funnels, upper funnel, middle funnel, and lower funnel. But I actually apply that exact same thinking when it comes to podcasts. So you have these larger shows, you have the medium-sized shows, and you have the smaller shows. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the channel holistically, you can then, you then have an efficient channel. What that does is when you have these smaller shows, and you're also thinking about frequency on all of these shows. So on the smaller shows where the audience size is, it's not growing as fast, maybe you'll have less frequency, but you'll see such impact on these affordable shows. You'll get insane ROI, ROAS, whatever it is that you need. And it then gives you the ability to be on, these more brandy, higher funnel shows that make it so that you have this entire journey basically, and you have this opportunity for multiple touch points all within one channel. And I think that that's something that's super unique about podcasts and audio. Whether that's buying national radio or local radio, whatever it is, you can always find holes and you can fill them. And so that would be, I think probably my 2 cents, my advice, in addition to all of the wonderful things that Miranda just said.
Anything, Kezia, Mei?
I would add, I would say patience and set your tracking and setting up goals. That's where I would say, because in the very beginning, it takes time to ramp up. It takes time to get everything ready. I mean, it took us forever to come up with an ad. Mm-hmm. It's all brand new. And so patience is really important.
Which performance marketers always have, right?
course. I'm very patient. And then the data piece is really important, at least in our business. We are in a B2B business. Our sales cycle is extremely long. There isn't an instant gratification where I'm like, we just sold X how many thousands or millions of product. It takes 6 to 12 to maybe 2 to 3 years,
Within your
depending on the size of the deal. And so like measurement where we look at, okay, how long has it been? Where is this lead at this point in time? That's really important to us. So in the very beginning, we have to set tracking and measurement in the very beginning so that we can compare it against the rest of the our paid media mix, right? Because at the end of the day, you're pretty much fighting for someone else's dollar,
Sure.
right? Someone
Sure.
mentioned about taking some of your meta dollars and putting into audio. Well, you have to show that it's going to do better than meta,
A better use or a better deployment of the dollars, exactly.
more efficiency,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
Yeah, and I think I'll just end with, if you know that audio is important to your audience, and so the question is, how do you know it's important? So if they are spending many hours, if it's part of their routine, so whether they're turning on the radio or playing something, it's part of their life, it should be part of your life. It should be part of your mix. And so it's just so powerful because they're open to the advertisement. They almost expect it. And so I don't know how many channels or people expect and embrace advertising. And so I just encourage you all to just find ways of making it work. The goal should be a nice mixture of audio channels, not being doubled down in one particular area. And just like Mei said, just be patient. Our goal has always been like, gold standard is always incrementality. So some of the panels talked about that. Like, we have to show incremental lift for everything that we do. If we can't get there the first time, then understanding that the creative work, that the mix of shows work, that the weight work, the seasonality, our business has seasonality like many of yours does. Maybe it's because we just ran the ads at the wrong time. And so again, just be clear how you're defining success. And it should be a mixture of learning objectives as well as conversion or brand or company objectives. And as long as you're checking some of those boxes every single time, that's a win. And so if this is your first time launching, use some of that with your internal stakeholders so that worst case scenario, if you don't get that incremental report at the end, you can still say, look at all the things that we learned, this is still a win. If you anchor too heavily on one metric and you miss that one metric, sometimes, depending on the companies you're at, it's gonna be pretty hard to get the ability to run a test again. And so I think you've just gotta precede some of that well before the campaign starts so that you have that long runway of testing and learning and patience. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank the panel, Mei, Kezia, Miranda, Eliza, for the pearls of wisdom on this.